The time to unfortunately sell off some Ohio State stocks has arrived with the transfer portal open, and it is a Wednesday on the beat presented by the Waterworks, so we have no choice but to divest. Is that a word?
Yes.
Uninvest? Divest? That's probably how you say it. Some of the stocks that we have bought, and some in abundance over the last couple of years, but maybe, just maybe, Birm, there's one that you could hang on to. That is Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And the dust has not settled. There could still very much be movement for Ohio State. But if we're taking a breather in this first dozen plus additions to the transfer portal or subtractions from the roster for Ohio State, and which ones are going to hurt the Buckeyes the most, where should we begin?
I mean, you have to start a cornerback, right? I mean, that's the spot where you lost Bryce West and Aaron Scott, and those are players that you weren't necessarily counting on them to be starters a year from now, but you certainly expected them to be heavily in the rotation for Ohio State, and they're both Ohio kids. They both put in 2 good years of work and prep and trying to get themselves ready to be starters at Ohio State. And so it's pretty unfortunate that that's not going to come to fruition. Bryce West signed with Wisconsin on Tuesday. That one's a done deal. Aaron Scott still exploring his options as he tries to figure it out. If you're Ohio State, it's kind of a wake-up call. And it's not necessarily that the Buckeyes did anything wrong or that Aaron Scott and Bryce West are doing anything wrong. This is just the new nature of college football. You are not going to be able to hold on to veteran depth at a place like Ohio State anymore. You're just not. The third and fourth string guy who's been in the program 3 years is not going to stick around. So we just have to disabuse ourselves of that notion. Those guys just will not exist anymore.
Yeah, but I think that's why you're starting this conversation by pointing out Aaron Scott or Bryce West, because they're not third or fourth string guys. When we talked on Snap Judgments at the end of last week as the portal opened, it's like the bottom third, the churn on the roster, that is going to be an annual tradition. You have to embrace it and adapt and evolve with the times. You won't be able to keep those people. And if you're Ohio State, you should be able to replace them much easier. I don't mean that as a knock or a slight on any of them. A lot of those guys, I've known for years since they were high school recruits. We've seen them in the Woody for a year or two. Great people. But if you're that far removed from the conversation, those are the spots that are just going to be up for grabs every single year. But that's not the scenario that Aaron Scott and Bryce West were going to find them in. And we can argue that maybe Aaron Scott was closer to the field than Bryce West, but depending on how the nickel spot rolls out, they could have actually been on level footing right there as well. I thought there was a world where I envisioned Aaron Scott and Devin Sanchez at corner and Jermaine Matthews moving to the nickel. That's not going to be possible with him not in the picture. But if Jermaine Matthews was not moving to nickel, then there was also a scenario where Bryce West was starting at that spot as he pushed forward against Lorenzo Styles throughout the summer and training camp a year ago. So those guys are exceptions to the third, fourth rung on the ladder and then leaving because they need to play, or they also have NIL opportunities elsewhere. That's why they're surprising to me. That's why they're the most significant. And corner, I think overall is going to be one of the more challenging spots to address in the transfer portal. So, I know that there are possibilities out there. There are players like Kayan Lee who have been recruited by Ohio State in the past who could be in play to take one of those spots, but you'd always still rather take the developed approach and have multiple guys with familiarity in the system, whether that's with Tim Walton, Matt Guerreri, Matt Patricia, whatever, or just simply being in the Woody and having Mickey Marotti have a strength plan for them. All those things are better when you have retention and a roster that has experience knowing what it takes to play at Ohio State. Nobody wants the alternative, which is why you're right. You have to start with Aaron Scott and Bryce West as the most significant departures.
Yeah. And again, it's not even a situation, I think, where Ohio State can feel they did anything wrong. I mean, if Bryce West, the number I've heard for Bryce West from Wisconsin was close to $1 million a year. I just don't know how you can justify paying a kid like that who hasn't played at Ohio State. And I know that Bryce has a lot of potential, and you like the fact that he stuck it out in the program for those 2 years and worked and tried to put himself in the position to compete for the starting job. But there still has to be some sort of reality in play here. Like, if the revenue share cap is roughly $16.5, $17 million, you just can't pay everyone $1 million. You just can't. And so unless Ohio State, and this is something we talked about at the live show on at Roosters with Bobby Carpenter on Monday, until you have like a big name donor who's just paying for your entire roster and guaranteeing the outside NIL opportunities, I just don't know how you can expect to survive in this era without making promises that you don't care if you keep. And once kids get locked in, then you're like, we'll figure it out. But it is challenging for Ohio State. It's going to continue to be. I think it will lead to a pretty seismic shift in the way that Ohio State handles its high school recruiting from now on, because quite frankly, and I'll turn the page here in this conversation to a guy like Mylan Graham, for example, who got paid a lot of money by Ohio State to come to Ohio State out of high school and has sat on the bench for 2 years and not gotten significantly better and not put himself in a position where he was even being looked at as a guaranteed starter a year from now. And at some point, Ohio State has to be willing to walk away and cut its losses. And so the entire motto, the mantra, the philosophy of developed here, which is like what Ohio State's been rooted in and the Buckeyes culture, like it's going to be tested because it's going to have to be built differently from this point forward. You just cannot sustain this in the way that it's being done. If you look at a guy like Damon Wilson, who announced on Tuesday that he was leaving Missouri again, Ohio State has been the runner-up for his services twice. He's transferred each of the last 2 years. Why? Like what, how are you getting better? What is the goal here? And again, I don't begrudge the kids or their parents really for going out and chasing what money they can get. But at some point, there is going to be a diminishing return when it comes to development and actually getting yourself ready for the NFL and the long-term, generational wealth that you can accrue in that space. And yeah, a couple $1 million is a lot of money, and that's certainly going to change people's lives. But you can't just throw money at it if you're Ohio State if you don't have the money. And so that's what you have to figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating juxtaposition with what you're talking about. If Ohio State has to adjust its strategy, which I think it has shown that it will, Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni are going to have to figure out the right balance between continuing high school recruitment and development with a need to have a veteran roster that competes at the very highest level, also combined with allocating resources, because even if the foundation is up and running again and certainly appears to be fully operational to assist with the CSC cap, that bucket of money is not bottomless. So you still have to figure out some way to piece these things together. And since you bring up Damon Wilson, I think that he's actually the right person to illustrate this point. It's not to pick on him or his decisions. I don't know him. I've never met him. All I know is the actions and NIL discussions and transfer moves that he's made throughout his career, dating back to his recruitment. Ohio State's philosophy on that front has been, if NIL is the primary motivator in a recruitment or a transfer portal decision, then that's when they're prepared to walk away. That can't be the only factor. And I don't think that part of it can be negotiated. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in these situations year after year after year. And not every player is Damon Wilson. And I'm not trying to pick on him, but that's a player that Ohio State said, well, here's the threshold, and we're going to walk away because it is clear to Ohio State that their perspective of the negotiation was that this is solely about NIL and not playing for Larry Johnson or Jim Knowles or then Matt Patricia or anybody else. And they have to maintain that part for me, Birm. I don't think they can shift off that, because otherwise, like, what is the brotherhood? What is Ohio State? It can't be a team of mercenaries just wearing scarlet and gray every year. You will use the portal. You will pay good players, but I don't think is something that they can compromise on.
No, I don't think they can. I don't think they're going to. I think it's also, when you look around college football and the teams that made the playoff this year, it's a bunch of teams that are veteran, experienced teams, guys that have played a lot of football. Ohio State can find good college football players elsewhere other than the high school ranks. So when it's probably a little bit maddening to folks who are listening, because the Buckeyes just signed 28 players in the class of 2026, which is the most they've ever signed out of high school. And I'm going to tell you right now, my expectation moving into 2027, that class, I wouldn't be surprised if they signed 10 less than that, because at this juncture, you can't waste your money and your resources on unproven, high school talent that is not playing as freshmen, because those guys do not matter. They are going to leave, or they're going to come to the table and ask for more money. And there are other players on the Ohio State roster currently, I'm not going to name names, that are going to be involved in those sort of discussions. And so this list that we've already had since the portal opened on Friday, and it's only been, 5 days, the Buckeyes have lost almost 17 players. Like, they're going to lose more, and there's going to be names in there that people are going to be like, what? Why did that happen? And this, quite simply, is outside of their control, because you cannot just give everyone everything they ask for when they've done nothing to earn it. And you are better off going out and finding receivers or defensive backs or defensive linemen who have contributed at the college level and understand what it takes to be successful, and then rewarding those players. So it's a very fascinating topic. I think for Ohio State perspective, they're working really hard to find the balance between the culture that has built the program to where it is, but also understanding that you have to adapt or die in this new era, because I said, you can't pay 60 guys anymore. Like, you just can't. So you're going to have to pay 30, 35, 40. And then the rest of the guys, it's like, whatever, come here, take a shot, and you're a free agent every year. So it does add to some interesting discussions.
All right. Well, you mentioned Mylan Graham at the start of that, and you know that I have every bit of stock that is available. So maybe I'm just hoping that I can still use it to great effect down the road. You mentioned on Tuesday on the Letterman Row website where we both work as well, that maybe there's at least a crack in the door. Maybe Mylan Graham could return back through it.
Maybe. I think it's possible, especially because Ohio State, the two of their top targets at wide receiver in the transfer portal were Jackson Harris from Hawaii and Trey Brown from Old Dominion. Both those guys went and visited LSU first, and neither of them left without committing to the Tigers. So you start to get into some discussions where you're Cortez Hankton and you are Devin Jordan, who I fully expect will be retained at Ohio State, by the way, just as a totally non sequitur. They're trying to build their room. And so if you have to start over, if you're Cortez Hankton, maybe it'd be better to start with a guy like Mylan, who you at least have a couple years of experience with Devin Jordan and inside the program. So that conversation, I think, is ongoing. Would I expect it to happen? Probably not. But again, you're building this roster and you look at next year's wide receivers and you have Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Ennis and Chris Henry Jr. And then that's pretty much it, because everyone else is up in the air, I think, at this point. In Ohio State, obviously, they hosted DeAndre Moore from Texas this week. There's other receivers that they're still looking at, but you can't be emotional about these players anymore. You can't be attached to them because no one's attached to anything. So when it comes to the decisions that you have to make, it's not really about like, oh, I like this guy better. It's like, hey, is he familiar with what we're doing? Is he a good culture fit? Is he able to come in and make an impact? And I don't know, man. These conversations are less and less comfortable every single year because we get familiar and get to know these kids and get to care about their long-term well-being. But at the bottom line, everyone's out for themselves. And so the Buckeyes have to be able to adapt and pivot to be out for themselves.
Well, I mean, the one thing that you can't ever compromise is being comfortable, especially not in the winter. And if you want to keep your home winter ready with the Waterworks and Hetter Energy Savings Plan, do that right now by getting priority heating service, members only savings, and continuous comfort all year long. Call today to schedule. So the Waterworks and Hetter, 614-232-2222. And you can get comfortable like Birm is.
I'm getting comfortable. Have you noticed how comfortable I am right now?
So comfortable.
Look, okay, I know people hate when we do ad reads, but I think they're important, especially when it comes to like my health, right? Yeah. I started Awaken 180, 3 weeks before the new year. And I'm down like almost 25 pounds. And it's not because I'm super heroic or disciplined or anything. I just was like, I don't want to keep waiting. I saw Austin get all thin and I was like, man, he looks so good. And here we are, second week of January. I'm down more than 20 pounds. And that's what happens because we have a real plan. Awaken 180 has great structure, coaching, support, all the things Ohio State needs, by the way, and not just motivation that fades in 2 weeks. So if weight loss is your goal and you haven't started yet, or you've already given up, just go to awaken180weightloss.com and you can do what I've done and what Austin did and what others are doing all over the country. So it's a fun time to change what you are. Ohio State has to change. They have to make these adjustments. And I think that the conversation I've had with people out of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center this week has been very, very direct in that this is a philosophy shift that's coming for Ohio State, but not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to.
Yeah, and I think I think back to what has it been, 4 months now, 5 months since the start of training camp when we talked to Mark Pantoni for one of our semi-annual conversations with him, on the record conversations, and him saying then pretty explicitly, when it becomes clear that a shift is necessary, Ohio State will make it. They are not stuck in their ways. I think that's been true with the way that Ryan Day has filled out his coaching staff. That's been true with the way that they've approached recruiting. That's true with the way that they've approached the transfer portal. That's true with the size of the coaching staff. That's true with the music that they play in the horseshoe at the end of the first quarter. I know that it feels frustrating outside the program, and that fans, Ohio State, like even within the Woody, a lot of people don't like it. Everyone would prefer things to stay the same, and Ohio State could just do what they did that made them the best program in college football, and it would stay the best program in college football. But the way that you do that is by making sure that you don't fall behind. And I know that there are times in recruitments or with NIL where it feels like Ohio State could push the envelope even more or could break rules. And that's another part that I don't advocate for them compromising on that. And I'm confident that they won't. So I don't have to really, I'm not out on a limb by saying that. But this is the first time, even though we've had the transfer portal for years, going almost a decade now at this point, in some form or fashion, where the national signing period and signing that class, where Ohio State adjusted both what it was paying and the size of that class a month ago. It capitalized on that, which I think is a way that it had not in the past. It was an adjustment. But this was the first time that you have one window only in 15 days in January to attack and dominate or adjust and survive either way throughout the month of January. So like some of what Ohio State may have thought it could do this month, in 5 days, it has already found out that maybe it could not. So maybe I'll be wrong, but I tend to think that even a third of the way through this window, that Ohio State has already seen what it needs to do. And sometimes that means that it has to walk away from its own players and not pay above the retention rate that it was willing to. And maybe that means that it'll be more aggressive with positions where, you saw in Birm on Tuesday, Christian Allegro visiting for Ohio State. That's a position where in the past you could have said, well, that's Ohio State's fine. They don't need a linebacker. They've got 3 coming back where they could reasonably feel good. But if nothing is guaranteed anymore, then you may need to cover your bases with veteran players so that you get old and stay old, which used to be the old college basketball adage, but now applies to college football as well, especially when you're looking at Indiana. I don't think I ever would have said those words out loud, but Ohio State has to look at that for the way that the competitive landscape has shifted.
I mean, we can thank the SEC for this portal window being where it is, because there should be one only after spring ball and everyone could have been happy except for the SEC, of course. But, even this signing class, even this class of 2026, the 28 kids, if you did this portal window at the end of spring, when you have 28 signees and 27 of them are enrolling early, you're going to have a much better sense of if you've wasted any early investment at that point, because you would see a ton of 2026 signees leaving their colleges at the end of spring if that's when the portal window was, and you'd actually have a much better sense of where your roster is going in the future. But it's neither here nor there. The point is, Ohio State it has said for the last few years they're going to build by retaining their roster. But that has even shifted, because now it's not about retaining the guys that you signed a year ago. It's about it's retaining the guys that have played football. It's about retaining Caden McDonald and Kenyatta Jackson. It is not about retaining any freshman who people think have a high ceiling, even though he didn't play this past year. So you have to be able to have all those conversations now. And it is crazy, but you're also going to see Ohio State then be linked to players like Chaz Coleman, who, over the weekend, there was a lot of hand wringing around the Buckeyes fan base that the Buckeyes weren't going to be willing to do what they had to do to bring in a guy like Chaz Coleman. He's on campus on Tuesday, and the Buckeyes clearly have not walked away from that. You're going to see Ohio State linked to guys like Quaver Saw and James Smith down from Alabama, former 5-star defensive lineman. who apparently want to play together at their next stop as well. You're going to see Ohio State linked to those guys. You're going to see the Christian Allegros. You're going to see the Kay and Lees. You're going to see guys like that are linked to Ohio State. But the reality for Ohio State, and that's at least this specific portal, and maybe it's going to change over the next couple of years as this philosophy takes roost and as long as the Buckeyes keep adapting, but they're still not really trying to replace a bunch of starters at Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, the people are, I think, frustrated that you're not seeing offensive linemen being targeted in the transfer portal. The Buckeyes don't need to replace any offensive line starters.
And I actually think, I was going to say, like, they did lose a starter. It was Tegra Shabola. And I think that that might be a bigger deal than we give it credit for. But everybody else looks at this point like they're coming back, and retaining and developing those guys, that seems like a pretty good strategy to me.
Right. So like, there are all these moving parts, and it may change over the next couple of years. But again, even a guy like Allegro, who the Buckeyes are very high on, he is clearly the top linebacker on the transfer board for Ohio State. He's not a player that you look at and say he's a definite starter for the Buckeyes, because you have Riley Pettijohn and TJ Alford and Peyton Pierce ready to go. So what you're looking for is quality depth. And it makes a whole hell of a lot more sense to pay for quality depth for guys that have played 3 years of college football than to assume that a high school freshman or a high school senior is going to be able to come in and be that guy as a freshman. Because of the 28 guys Ohio State signed in their recruiting class just a month and a half ago, or a month and 4 days ago, like 7, 8 of them are going to be able to contribute as freshmen. And I'm going to tell you right now, the other 20 are they're open season for those guys next year. Like, you can't expect them to stay, because this is just not the world of college football we're living in. So until there are actual rules and actual guidelines and actual structures and the collective bargaining and all that stuff that has to happen, like, we are letting college football be an absolute train wreck. And as long as schools like Oregon and Texas Tech and even Michigan now with the ties to Larry Ellison and Oracle money, like, those are the schools, they're going to do a better job of retaining the players that maybe that people didn't think they would. And so that's why in the last 24 hours, you've seen a lot of players make a decision to return to Michigan after entering the transfer portal, because they've got the money lined up. So Ohio State has some decisions to make, but most of it comes down to just simply finding a benefactor that wants to give you a couple $1 million every year. And by a couple, I mean like 30.
You don't think it has anything to do with Michigan actually hiring a competent coach and a staff that knows what it's doing?
No.
No,
I don't.
Fair enough. All right.
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, that probably reopens the conversation, but that's not ultimately that's not what's going to make the biggest difference. I mean, you look at Ohio State right now, the conversations are with guys, as I said, like Caden McDonald or Kenyatta Jackson or Max Clare. And it's not like these guys are trying to go somewhere else necessarily. It's like, hey, maybe they can go to the NFL. And that's the type of player the Buckeyes are trying to retain. But there is going to be a shift here where the lower third of the roster, it does not matter. Like, period. I mean, we talked about it again at the Rooster Show with Bobby on Monday. But Miami didn't rotate a single player on defense. Like, it doesn't matter. If you have your 11 starters and you've got 4 or 5 good quality depth guys behind them, like, it's time to start building the roster like an NFL roster.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have both said that that's the bottom third with a churn. Like, it may extend all the way to the top half, because if you're thinking about an NFL roster and a 53-man roster and college football roster traditionally being 85 scholarship players and walk-ons being 100, like, if you just have to get to that point where you have a 2 deep that you're invested in, that's not the way college football has traditionally worked. What made Ohio State, what made the Alabamas and the Georgias, the Texas, Oklahoma, the powerhouse programs throughout history, was that they would be able to roll through everyone on their roster if they needed to. And it's not a problem that's isolated to Ohio State. Alabama is out. They got dominated by Indiana. Georgia, they're out. LSU didn't even make the playoff and had to break the bank to sign Lane Kiffin. Like, this, we thought for years that everyone would say the parity was coming to college football and the public playing field was going to be leveled by NIL. That didn't happen initially. It has happened now. The Wild West part of this has allowed other programs, not just Indiana, not just Texas Tech, not just Oregon, the ones that we've named, like, other programs are able to compete on more level playing field. Illinois, Brett Bielema said this. He talked with Bruce Feldman over the weekend that Illinois had not beat SEC teams in their history, and they won back-to-back bowl games against them this year. Like, they are an example of that as well. So that is because you can no longer stockpile 4 and 5 star players on the 3rd and 4th rungs of your depth chart ladder. Like, that's no longer going to be the reality. And I know that everyone will want that back. If you are a fan of Ohio State, if you're listening to The Beat presented by the Waterworks, you will say, well, why not? Why don't we have that money? Well, if you're a billionaire listening, I think there's a way that you could fix that, but otherwise there isn't.
Yeah, because Mark Cuban is not going to slow down his investing in Indiana football as they continue to win. So they're going to actually elevate their talent level and be able to compete in this new era, because that's what they've done. So it's more incumbent than ever on Ryan Day, on Ross Bjork, on the powers that be that are running the Ohio State program to make sure that the culture starts and stops really with the coaching staff, and making sure that whoever the players are that are inside of that building are buying in. And that might mean you take players and you go after some talents that in the last couple of years you might have passed up because you weren't sure if they were a perfect culture fit or not. Now you have to find ways to conform those guys, period. Because the top tier talent is being spread out across the country in a way that if Ohio State doesn't go out and finish this deal with Kay and Lee, for example, I mean, who's your starting slot? Where do you go? Because they're not just growing on trees, and Tennessee's willing to pay him. Texas is willing to pay him. Ole Miss is willing to pay him. Everyone's paying. So, we made the joke a few years ago when Michigan won the national championship, and then Ohio State, and now Indiana's the favorite, and Oregon's up there. Like, in a world where everyone's allowed to pay, and not just the SEC paying people, behind closed doors or under the table, like this is the way it's going. So we're getting that parity that, as you said, that it's been kind of hinted at for years, but it's fully here now. And I don't see it changing, because unless some exceptionally philanthropic billionaire decides that he wants to fund the Ohio State football program for a couple of years, it's going to put the people in charge of the Ohio State program much more in the crosshairs as far as their evaluations and where they're spending their money.
It's a great point as well that puts a greater onus on the stability and the success of that coaching staff and getting those hires right. And I suspect we might have more to say about that process in the days ahead as January. Gosh, it's January 7th, and
it's January 74th right now. And the transfer portal's open for 58 more days. So good luck. Yeah. These next couple of days are going to be weird, man. Like, it's going to be super weird until the 16th. So, like, as we've said, every single player on the roster can leave. And that's it.
So buckle up and stick with us on the Austin Birm Show on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV, 10 TV Plus, anywhere you get your podcast. You can find this show, and we appreciate you spending part of your Wednesday with us. A strange, kind of angry stock watch, but
it's not angry. It's just realistic. We have to be able to
passionate. How about passionate?
We have to be able to pinpoint the issue here, which is the game is changing. Ohio State has always adapted. They're going to continue to adapt. And I think you will see more adaptation from the Buckeyes in these next couple of weeks and these next few months than we've seen in the last 10 years combined. That's what I think.
Seems like a very good chance that there will be snap judgments coming on the Austin and Birm Show later on, whether that's on Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know, but there's going to be more news happening. We can promise you that. So stick with us. As always, we'll cover Ohio State football, rain, snow, sleet, or hail, 365 days a year. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.